Father's Day. I know, Father's Day is always kind of one of those more interesting, I guess, kind of messages to preach as a pastor. Typically when you come in for like Mother's Day, like Mother's Day, let's be honest, most of like Mother's Day messages like, moms, you're so amazing. Like you changed my life forever. There's oftentimes a lot of tears and a lot of emotion to it, and we're so thankful, and we're always lifting up our moms and how amazing they are, and as we should, our moms are amazing. But isn't it kind of funny how we'll go from a Mother's Day like that to when it comes around to Father's Day, it can sometimes feel a little more like this, like, dads, where have you been at? Like where you been? You're MIA. Guys, it's time to man up. Guys, it's time to be the man you're called to be. It's time to rise up. It's time to start fighting and doing more than you've done. And look, my hope for you guys tonight especially is that wouldn't be the case tonight. This is not a message of condemning or trying to put you down. That's not it at all. In fact, actually, the whole focus of tonight's message actually has nothing to do with looking back, but has everything to do with looking ahead. And in fact, tonight, I want to kind of challenge you. In fact, in a lot of ways, guys, I want to kind of come alongside you and really cheer you on. Cheer you on as we look ahead in terms of specifically this ideal of leaving a legacy. Leaving kind of having a ripple effect when it comes to our family, when it comes to those around us, and specifically leaving a legacy of faith. Leaving a legacy of faith. And so I want to kind of jump into just this topic by starting off in a passage in Hebrews chapter 12. And it starts at Hebrews 12, verses 1 through 2. It says, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles us. Let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. I love that imagery of this cloud of witnesses. Oftentimes people ask, hey, when those my loved ones are in heaven, like do they actually know what's going on here in my life, here on earth? And this is a great passage, actually reminds us that they very much so. They know what's going on. Your loved ones who are believers in Christ, they're right there in the midst of that crowd. They're right there in the midst of that crowd of witnesses. And I love this imagery of just kind of this stadium full of our loved ones, of some of these giants of the faith just sort of cheering us on. Hey man, God's got great plans for you. God's got a purpose for you, and just cheering you on to run this race of faith and to make it to the finish line. In fact, especially as guys, I think we can really get this picture. I mean, if you're a kid ever growing up, I mean, you've probably more than a few times envisioned yourself like in a stadium full of people hitting that game-winning shot, or in your office and you like crumple up the little paper wad and toss it in the paper basket, and you're like, yes, you envision this, And again, I love this picture, and specifically when it's talking about this crowd of witnesses, it's actually referencing the chapter before. It's actually referencing these sort of greats of the faith, and also in chapter 11, as we're going to look at, it actually kind of speaks to this race, kind of what the finish line is, what it is they're cheering us on to, and this legacy that you and I, and especially us guys, are being called to pursue, to chase after. And simply in a word, where you're going to come to discover throughout Hebrews 11 is this key theme, this key word that plays out in every single one of their lives, is you see a man and a woman, you see Rahab, you see Moses, you see all these giants of the faith, each one living to leave a legacy of faith. In fact, throughout the whole chapter, it's by faith. By faith, Moses did this. By faith, Rahab did this. By faith, Jacob did this. By faith. See, that's the call. That's what they're cheering, I believe, you and I on to tonight. It's to pursue and to run this race, to leave a spiritual legacy, to leave a legacy of faith. And specifically, I just want to kind of focus on, for our time tonight, just one of sort of these kind of spiritual giants in this sort of hall of faith, if you will. And we read of him in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 7. And again, it says, by faith, Noah, when warned about things not yet seen, in holy fear built an ark to save his family. I love that. By faith, Noah. And this is really kind of the first point to tonight's message, is that you got to understand, when it comes to building a legacy of faith, is that faith is built through God's plan. Faith is built through God's plan. Notice at the end of that verse, it says, by faith, Noah, when warned about things not yet seen. Noah lived in a very tough time, a very sinful time, very wicked time. I mean, it made Las Vegas, I don't know, seem like a nursery. I mean, it was incredibly wicked time. It was incredibly evil time. In fact, it actually says that's what they would do is they would literally spend their days just thinking of ways how they could, ruin someone else's life, how they could cheat somebody, how they could rob someone, how they could, destroy someone else's life. I mean, this world had become just that depraved, that wicked. The sin had just been that consuming. And yet out of that, we see Noah. And I love this. Again, it says holy fear. And holy fear, he built an ark to save his family. To save his family. By the way, I love that where it says holy fear. Noah had a fear, but he also had faith. Sometimes I think we can think the two are totally counteractive, that the two have nothing to do with one another. But true faith, when it talks about leaving a legacy of faith, faith doesn't mean that we lack fear. Faith is not the absence of fear. Faith is when you feel the fear, and in the words of Joyce Meyer, you do it anyway, right? You kind of push through that. See, faith is when you like to stick your head in the sand and just hope it turns out all right, hope someone else takes the responsibility, hope someone else steps up to the plate. But you, even in the fear, you answer the call. You step out in faith. And so here's Noah. In the middle of his fear, by faith, he did something. And what he did, the Bible says, is he built an ark. Now, you got to understand something. This was more than just building a boat. It says he built an ark. This ark, you got to understand something, is that, and I shared this a couple weeks ago, is every single story in the Bible is a Jesus story. Every single story, especially throughout the Old Testament, it paints a picture of Jesus. It paints a picture of what he came to do and how he came to deliver us. And in fact, the ark is really, in so many ways, we're going to come to discover, it's a picture of ultimately God's rescue plan, not just for Noah and his family, but God's rescue plan for humanity. And God's rescue plan specifically as it's fleshed out in his church. In his church. All right. In fact, some scholars actually, in talking about, again, kind of connecting this picture and this, really this foreshadowing of ultimately our salvation, what Jesus would do for us on the cross. Actually, kind of, in fact, I wish I had time to kind of unpack all the kind of correlating pictures and parts to this, but it says, like, even like in the fact how when the ark was built, it had just this one door. There's one door in, right? It should sound familiar to us. Jesus said, I'm the way, I'm the truth, I'm the life. I'm the sheep gate. No man gets to the Father, enters into the Father except through me. And so again, what we're beginning to see, we see this picture of ultimately his church, ultimately his rescue plan. See, listen, but by faith, Noah built. By faith, Noah invested his life in God's rescue plan. God's rescue plan. When I think of my life and when I think of my boy and I think of the legacy of faith I want to leave in his life, or the legacy I want to leave in his life, man, I want it to be a legacy of faith. I wanted to so desperately to leave a legacy like Noah. I want to leave a legacy that has the power to save. I want to see my boy come into a relationship with Jesus. I want to see my boy having this life-giving, walk with Jesus. And that's what we see him investing his life in. who is investing his life in this rescue plan. And listen, I think if Noah were here today, that would be the challenge he would have for you and for me. Is that, man, with this one and only life, are you and I willing, if we were serious about leaving a legacy of faith, are we willing to get serious about investing our one and only life in his rescue plan, a.k.a. the mission of his church, the mission of his bride? And so this is what we see. And again, here's Noah, and he goes out and, he starts to, goes home and basically tells his wife that, look, I'm going to start building this ark. I'm going to start building this boat, which you can imagine if you went home today and had a talk with your wife and said, by faith, I just feel like we need to buy a boat. We need to start building a boat. We need a boat. I felt like God just put this on my heart. In fact, some of you spouses have probably had that conversation with your husband. He's like, surprise, here's a brand new truck. I should have probably told you about this, right? But Mrs. Noah in this story, she understood something. She knew this wasn't just a pleasure trip. Noah had a calling to build this thing. He had a calling to build this thing. He had a calling and to leave a legacy of faith, to invest his life in this rescue plan for his family, for his future, for humanity. And again, we connect this again to where we're at. And again, I think if Noah were here, it would be this call for you and for I to invest our lives in this rescue plan known as his church. And listen, here's why this is significant. We've been in a series, talking about homegrown. How to grow those relationships that hit closest to home to us. How do we, grow kind of healthy relationships in terms of our parenting? How do we grow healthy relationships in terms of marriage and our friendships? And listen, this is significant. Don't just gloss over it like, okay, this is a call to get more involved in church, and that's great and stuff. No, listen. This is more than that. See, by getting involved, what we come to discover actually throughout Scripture and time again is listen, when you and I, when we're willing to build, when we're willing to build his house, ultimately it's amazing how it builds our house as well. When we're willing to get involved in his rescue plan, it's amazing how his blessing pours over into our home as well. And so the question is, and the challenge is that listen, will we, not just build something for others, are we willing to commit ourselves to this rescue plan, and not just to rescue, I guess, and save and make an impact in our family, but in the world around you? Because the truth is, you and I, we're constantly building stuff. You and I, we're constantly building stuff. So often the question you and I have to ask ourselves is not, what am I building or will I build? It's specifically, what will I build? We're always building. And is the legacy that I'm building, because we're all building a legacy, is the legacy I'm building something that's going to last? Will it be here 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, 100 years? Right? Is it something that's going to last? When the storms of life come, when my life ends, is it something that's going to carry on beyond just me? Beyond just me. In fact, actually, in Genesis 6, when God's talking to Noah, he kind of goes all Home Depot on Noah. And it's really interesting here. He starts to kind of go through the details of this rescue plan. And it kind of speaks, I think, in kind of a language that I think especially guys, we can tend to really understand. He says, this is how you're to build it. He's talking about this ark. He's talking about this rescue plan. He says the ark is to be 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, 30 cubits high. Make a roof for it, leaving below the roof, and opening 1 cubit high all around. Put a door in the side of the ark, and make lower, middle, and upper decks. And I kind of love this description because, again, I think especially in some ways, God here, he's speaking in a language in a way that guys especially we tend to get. Because guys, we're by nature, we love to sort of measure our lives and measure our stuff up against everyone else, the world around us. In fact, I wish I had a measuring tape. I'd kind of demonstrate it. But, but think about it. You go to your neighbors, and what's one of the first things you tend to do? You see the brand new boat, and it's like, how big is that? What is that, 15, 20-footer, right? You go in, you see their TV, you're like, what was that, like 30 inch, 32? I mean, that's not bad. I mean, mine's like a 50-inch, but yeah. I mean, we have this tendency to sort of measure our lives. And in some cases, sort of measure the worth of our lives, by everything around us, right? And in some ways, I think by God really kind of putting, this description and putting this rescue plan on the table, in some ways is sort of asking Noah the same question, is when it comes to the measure of a man, and really the true measure of a man is the legacy he leaves. And this legacy you're leaving, is it something that's really going to stand the test of time? Is the legacy you're going to leave just simply stuff or maybe some success or maybe this, a special team or something that you're like, I mean, is your legacy going to be something temporal or is the legacy you're going to leave something that makes an eternal difference in the lives of others? Is it going to be a legacy that actually rescues people, that saves people? And again, this is key. If you again want to build your house, you want to grow your house, you want to see God's blessing on your house, listen, for some of us, it starts by really getting serious and making a commitment to sit there and say, listen, I'm going to invest in building God's house. In fact, one of the great stories that kind of speaks to this in the Old Testament is that, David speaks of another ark. David, they've got this ark. They're trying to bring it back in the city, and as they're bringing it in the city, they basically park it in this guy's house named Obed, and they just leave it there. And it says, actually, in the text, it says that as long as it was there, as long as their focus was on the ark, as long as their focus was on the presence of God, as long as they were investing there, his whole house was blessed. His whole house was blessed. There's something about when we build and we invest in God's house that actually builds and blesses our house. In fact, I shared this a couple weeks ago that when it comes to blessing, so often we tend to just want God to just sort of bless our plans. So it's like, God, just bless my business. God, will you bless my project? God, will you bless my dream? And again, as I shared before, is that, what I found with God is that oftentimes when God pours out his blessing, he doesn't just pour it specifically on a single person. Typically, he pours it in places. And those places are always found on the other side of obedience. They're always found on another side of a step. When you get beyond just you and living just for you and living just for your stuff and living just for simply making a name for yourself. But when you're willing to live for something bigger than you, when you're willing to walk in obedience. It said Noah, actually, he said he did what God commanded. After God laid out this plan, it said immediately, no, he didn't argue, he didn't complain, he didn't start saying, man, I'm just not feeling this right now. No, he walked in obedience. And as a result, his family was blessed, his family was saved. He built a legacy of faith. When you look at your life, when you look at what you're building, when you look at what you're investing in, listen, is it something that is strong enough and sturdy enough to outlive your life? Is it something that will make a difference, not just in your life, make not just a name for yourself, but actually has the strength and the courage that when the storms come, when trials come, it has the ability to lay the foundation, especially when we're talking about our kids and we're talking about the next generation. Are we building something that when trials come their way? Because truth is, you can't save your kids from every trial and every single storm. But what you can do is you can show them how you can build a legacy and remind them of where they can run to when those storms come, of where they can find help and where they can find a refuge and where they can find a safety and security in the arms of our God. But you got to build. You got to build. And yet here's the reason why so many of us don't. Here's the reason why so many of us oftentimes leave legacies that might last a generation or two, but typically, ultimately, kind of fade into the sunset. Legacies that don't really make an impact beyond our generation, beyond our lives. And we see this in Matthew chapter 24, verses 37 through 38. And here he's speaking of the end times. Sometimes people ask me, wait, when are we in the end times right now, Pastor? How do we know? Well, this passage kind of speaks to. It says, as it was in the days of Noah, so it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. For in the days before the flood, people were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, up to the day Noah entered the ark. And they knew nothing about what would happen until the flood came and took them all away. Now, typically when we hear that, immediately we just sort of assume that Jesus was talking about the wickedness of the world. Right? Well, yeah, I mean, that was a wicked time. Again, they were just contemplating all the mean things, all the wrong things they could do, how they could screw over this person or wrong that person. But notice, Jesus is actually very specific here about, some of the signs of how we know we're in the end times. When he's referring to the days of Noah, what's interesting, he's not referring to their wickedness. Notice what he says. It says, people were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage. In other words, they were just doing life. They were just living their life. They were going their own way, pursuing their own dreams, pursuing their own stuff, living for me. They were just doing life. And again, none of this stuff was bad. Man, it wasn't bad. I mean, getting married, that's not bad. Celebrating, spending time, fellowshipping with good friends, it's not bad. Eating, it wasn't bad. Investing in their 401k plan, this wasn't